Hey, it's the Midnight Narrator here. Today's story is scary enough that you'll glance at the corner of your room, but calm enough to keep the lights off. It's Sleep with One Eye Half Open, spooky, not text your therapist at 2 a.m. Scary. Let's go. The corridor stretched so long it felt like a suggestion rather than a place, the way a word said too often loses its edges. Dr. James Cartwright walked with a clipboard pinned to his chest by habit and a stethoscope ghosting the notch of his collarbone. He moved like a careful man, one who understood what a raised voice could do to a quiet room. In 1952, the hospital had 3 floors and 4 kinds of silence. Day shift silence, all rolling carts and murmurs. Night shift silence thin as paper. The storm silence swollen with a barometric ache. And then there was the silence that came when people forgot they were people and sat for hours as still as the old radiators. Patient 237 belonged to that last silence. She was young in the way of someone who would never get older, eyes fixed on a corner where paint had curled up like fingernails. Cartwright had burned the last of her drawings that afternoon, though the smell of scorched paper still clung to his cuffs. He told himself it was for her peace, and for the staff who'd begun to see tall figures where coats hung. The sketches had been busy with lines that refused to meet properly, rooms that leaned, doorways taller than sense, and beings stretched like taffy to the ceiling. He looked at the wastebasket and thought of absolution. "Evening," he said to the nurse, and they exchanged the kind of look shared by people who'd emptied the same bedpans and heard the same prayers. He stepped inside. Patient 237. No name on the chart anymore. That had gone missing when the winter did. Breathed like she'd carefully set the rhythm years ago and never deviated. Cartwright checked the pupils with a penlight. He spoke her number, then spoke the name he believed she might once have had, trying to tug her back with syllables. She woke like a snapped string. Her breath caught, broke, then flooded her face with color. Hands clawed for his sleeve. "They kept me," she whispered, but the whisper knew it would become a scream and was already practicing. "They kept me there, the space between. I wasn't supposed to see." Cartwright steadied her. "Where, Miss—" He stopped, correcting himself, embarrassed by the old automatic. She pointed to the ceiling corner, to the shadow that wasn't a shadow so much as a suggestion of height. "Never fall asleep aware," she said, voice scraping its way up her throat. "Never watch the transition. They're waiting there." He felt the penlight heavy in his hand, the temperature in the room lowered by the sort of degree you don't catch with a thermometer, only with the soft skin on your wrist. She reached for him again, nails breaking on his coat. "Promise me," she said, lighting up with the last electricity of a failing bulb. "Promise you won't look when the world dims," he promised. It sounded thin. She smiled like she'd heard a child recite a poem correctly. Then her eyes moved to the corner and widened in a shape Cartwright would remember even in the dark behind his own eyelids. Her heart failed cleanly, with the merciless grace of certain endings. Later, in his office, he burned the smuggled sketches in a basin and told himself the ash had solved something. But one page, tucked between patient bills and a menu for the cafeteria fish on Fridays, escaped the flame. He wouldn't find it for years, by which time there was a new wing and better lighting and a different way of naming whatever people saw at the edge of sleep. The hospital slept and woke, slept and woke as years passed like soft footfalls. The room at the end of the corridor remained a room at the end of a corridor, but the paint peeled in patterns that no longer resembled paint. Somewhere else, so far away it was next door, the world took a breath and held it. In that held breath lived a place like a mezzanine installed over reality, and in that place things watched with the patience of long winter. Say, continue for the next chapter. Chapter 2, A Pharmacist of Nights. Maya Chen learned to stack her waking hours like books, neat and alphabetical. It helped the nights feel less chaotic. The lab smelled of coffee and disinfectant, the two poles of a scientist's day. She wore her hair in a knot that survived most disasters and taped a sticky note to her monitor that said, "Drink water like a boss," in Sarah's lupin hand. "Your cortisol curve is a crime," David told her, flipping through charts with a neurologist's parental exasperation. He'd been her friend since the first time they'd been paired to present on slow-wave sleep, and she'd taken the microphone with hands that didn't shake because they were too tired to remember how. You take the compound, you get 5 hours. You avoid the compound, you get 3. Both are trash. Maya swirled the vial. It braided light. "Is this what friendship looks like? You calling my sleep trash?" "I call your sleep trash because I love you," he said and grinned. "Also, because it's clinically trash." They ate noodles in the break room with the microwave politely complaining in beeps. The city moved outside the windows, all brake lights, and the steady hum of infrastructure invisible until it fails. Sarah texted a photo. Their cat, Ripple, folded into a question mark on a book about tides. "You coming home by 10? Asked the caption. Maya typed yes, then added maybe, and deleted it, then left it as yes. She arrived at 10:19 to the quiet of a home that understood its occupants. Sarah's shoes by the door, a plant curling its glossy leaves toward the last of the day. 2 mugs in the sink, with ghost crescents of tea. They moved around each other, the way practiced dancers do, each anticipating the other step. "How's the compound behaving?" Sarah asked, noting the stainless chill of the vial case at Maya's hip. "Like a polite storm," Maya said. "It does what it says, just too well. Keeps me at the edge." They brushed their teeth in the same mirror, shoulder to shoulder. Maya's reflection followed her a beat slower, and she blamed the angle of the glass. They read a page and a half each, then bumped noses in the dark and laughed into the pillows. Maya had always met sleep the way some people meet their in-laws, cautious, prepared to leave early. She felt the border approach most nights, that creamy thinning of sound, that drift of color. Lately, it had become more like easing down a ramp alongside a truck you can't quite see the top of. She took the new dose with the cool, resigned conviction of a researcher testing her own bridge. Drift came. She hovered, the room cooled by a memory or a draft. She couldn't tell which. Sound muffled like cotton in the ears. Then she made the oldest mistake. She looked at the moment of change instead of allowing it. The world dimmed by a fraction. She held on. Geometry loosened. The corner of the room uncoiled into something taller than it should be. Shadows weren't shading so much as slow-moving creatures of height. The nightstand leaned a millimeter too far right. The lamp stretched. Maya watched herself breathing, a foreigner to her own chest. She tried to flex a finger. Nothing. She tried to murmur Sarah's name. The syllable jammed in the doorframe of her throat. Something stood in the corner that wasn't a corner anymore. It had the posture of somebody who had been standing for a very long time and had grown patient about it. Height like a cathedral, width like a rumor. It had no face except for the sense of being looked at by a room full of small, attentive eyes. It tipped its head, not unkindly. "Oh," she thought, "you." The thought arrived with the calm of a scientist labeling a specimen. The fear came like an afterthought, less sharp than expected. The figure did something that was either a lean or an attention. The room thinned. It felt as if she were floating on her own breath, and the breaths had gotten stingy. Then everything snapped like a rubber band long overdue for snapping. Maya gasped. Sound returned in full color. Sarah snored softly beside her, a sound she loved because it was evidence and not argument. The clock said 15 seconds had fallen through a trapdoor. She lay awake until there wasn't any night left to be awake in, the word watcher moving through her mind without asking permission. When she finally slipped under, she didn't dream so much as rest her thoughts like dishes beside a sink. In the morning, she said nothing to Sarah and everything to a notebook. The entry read like a weather log. 15-sec transition geometry drifted observed entity in northeast corner. Tall, patient, multiple eye feeling fear, mild curiosity. High breath paused. She underlined breath paused and sat with that until the coffee went. Then texted David a request for time with the EEG cap and told herself this was inquiry, not obsession. Just before she left for work, she looked back at the bedroom. The corner looked like a corner again. She felt the faint tug of a place behind a place. Something waited in the seam between the day and whatever came after it, and she had looked right at the seam. On the sidewalk, she passed a man whistling tunelessly, a child in a dinosaur backpack scuffing his feet to make the most noise possible, a pigeon with the air of a landlord. The ordinary blessed her with its silly crown. Still, a thought moved like a fish under the dock. Never fall asleep aware. She didn't know where the thought had come from, only that it felt borrowed. Say, continue for the next chapter. Chapter 3. Literature review, unpublished research became a coat she couldn't take off. Maya read between patients and protocols, between email threads and microwaved leftovers. Morning broke over her monitor in gentle squares of light, as if the sun were trying not to distract her. Her search terms were not the terms she would put on a grant application. She read medieval accounts of sleep visitors with knees too tall for beds. She read sailors' journals describing the press, a weight that pinned a chest while some tallness watched from the door. She read about a woman in a mountain village who swore the church steeple turned inside out on nights when the fog rode low. Cultures had invented names for the same ache. The names were interesting. The overlap was what made the root of her neck tighten. The threshold state had papers with good citations and diagrams that did not quite admit to what she'd seen. On page 5 of a journal from 1998, a black-inked name she didn't know fluttered in her attention, Elise Voss. Transient awareness in hypnagogic passage, a neurophenomenological account. The abstract read like a clockmaker describing a sigh. The conclusion hinted at something bigger and closed its mouth. Maya went liminal herself. Between meetings, between meals, in the hours after Sarah fell asleep, and before she tried. She followed footnotes the way some people follow maps to lost houses. She found mention of Voss again in a conference schedule that had been canceled for rain. And then nothing. It was like watching footprints lead to a river and stop. She leaned back. The lab hummed. David patted in like the ghost of coffee. "You're on the hunt," he said, and deposited a mug by her elbow. "Tell me you know Elise Voss," she said, half a joke and half a wish. He rubbed his temple. "I know the name. Threshold stuff." Then poof. "If you're reading her again, we're officially through all the polite explanations." "Polite explanations are tired," she said. "I want the impolite ones." He dropped into the chair opposite. "Okay, the thing you described last night." He held up a palm when she started to protest, because she hadn't told him everything, and he was smart enough to hear the unsaid. Sleep paralysis is a thing. Hallucinations in the doorframe of consciousness is a thing. But your oxygen dips here. He tapped a graph. Your EEG says you were awake and not awake. It's not an officially sanctioned state. You know how sometimes the machine draws a line it wasn't taught to draw? And the line looks like a place, she said. David watched her with the wary care of a friend who'd seen people walk toward edges. "Promise me you'll sleep next to someone when you do this again. If you must do this again," he added, and she loved him for the ritual of the addendum. "I sleep next to someone every night," she said. "That's the worst part. I slip, the room goes wrong, and she keeps breathing like nothing's happening." They both stared at the graph because it was easier than staring at the thought. Maya went home with a stack of printouts and a conviction that sat like a coin under her tongue. She told Sarah about a paper, about an obscure researcher, about a woman who wrote clean sentences about messy borders. She did not say she planned to hold the border again that night. They cooked, and the room filled with onion and ginger. And Sarah told a story about a kid who'd asked whether the spelling test would accept emojis. Ripple attempted theft with great theater, and was gently foiled. In the flow of that evening, the idea of a thing that waited in the seam between inhale and exhale seemed rude and small. The ordinary often wins if you let it. At bedtime, Maya lay with the notebook open on the nightstand, a pen uncapped beside it, preparations made as if laying out clothes for a morning flight. The apartment settled, the heater ticked. The bedroom contained only what a good bedroom should. Still, she met the ramp and chose to walk it with her eyes open. The first seconds brought the now familiar softening, like frost forming on an edge. The geometry sighed out of its tolerances, a tilt. Her lungs made a polite decision to pause. The corner contained its resident. Tallness considered her. The attention felt neither predatory nor kind, only alert, like a librarian who had noticed a reader had wandered into the wrong aisle. She tried to lift a finger. No. She attempted a syllable. No. She thought of Sarah's name so hard it made a bright mark in her mind. The tallness leaned as if intrigued by bright marks, and then something like a thought not hers reached her skin without crossing the air. A pulse of curiosity, old and tireless. Not words precisely, but the shape of words before they decide what language to be in. Images more than language. A child staring at a ceiling with the snow light bouncing, a teenager half dozing in a bus seat, and seeing the aisle elongate a breath too long, a graduate student napping on a couch in a library while the stacks leaned inward in slow friendliness. All times she had felt watched without fear, the sense of a presence that had not yet learned hello. It has always been you, the shape implied. No, that's not quite right. Always with you. Maya felt the fear soften the way a nurse loosens a too tight band. Something else threaded through the moment. Tendrils, she thought, before she wanted to have thought that. Threads of dimness linked the tallness with the sleep of the person beside her. And not only this corner, faint trails crossed the ceiling like cobwebs the air was too polite to disturb. They vanished into the wall and the street, and every bedroom stacked like letters in an apartment building slots. Her chest burned. The return snapped her. The nightstand returned to its height. The corner became geometry again. Sarah exhaled and turned, her hair an untidy vogue against the pillow. Maya reached for the notebook with hands that were hers again. Night 2. Entity present curiosity pulse with not at. Filaments toward S. Feeding? Comforting? Both? Breath pause longer. Monitor? She pressed her palm to her sternum and counted, slow, as if her ribs would take offense otherwise. On count 20, she heard the thin whine of the fridge cycle on in the kitchen. It felt like proof of something merciful. The next morning, before her coffee could pretend it had done anything, she hacked together a simple alarm on her phone. A soft chime set to rise. If her oxygen dipped below the threshold, the hospital wristband reported overnight. Redundant. Childish. She strapped the band anyway. David would say good. Sarah would say please. She said nothing, which was its own kind of vow. At lunch, she found a thread, a P.O. box in Oregon, attached to a subscription service for a journal that had gone out of print when cell towers were fewer. The name on the order? E. Voss. She stared long enough that her noodles went slack. It wasn't proof. It was a doorway. That night, she told Sarah about a cabin near a lake and how air smelled when pine took off its perfume and heat. You want to visit a stranger because of a paper she wrote when I was in middle school? I want to visit a stranger because she built a ladder with words and then stepped off it, Maya said. I want to ask why. Sarah watched her face and did the thing she did when fear tried to make her a cop. She became a partner instead. We'll go on Friday, she said. We'll make a thermos and take snacks. And you'll promise me you'll sleep with your eyes closed until then. I'll try. The phrase lived where honesty and hope hold hands. That evening, the border felt near even while she was doing the dishes. The water ran lukewarm over her wrists, and she thought of breath pausing and numbers on a graph. She slept beside Sarah as if sharing a thin raft with the person she loved on a night lake, listening for ripples and finding only the sound of a loon in the distance that might have been a neighbor's song through a wall. In the seam between blink and blink, something observed the shape of their bodies under blankets like a gentle mathematician taking measurements for a kindness. Say, continue for the next chapter. Chapter 4. The Cabin with Diagram Walls. The road to the cabin was a thread through fir and hemlock. Sarah drove because she liked to, hands at 10 and 2, a thermos rattling in the cup holder like a tame thunder. Maya watched the trees flicker past and thought of frames in a film of the thin black spaces where the picture isn't, but your mind makes the motion anyway. Tell me the plan again, Sarah said, because saying plans out loud makes them less likely to trip on their own laces. I knock. Maya held up the paper with the P.O. box number circled. I introduced myself. I say, your paper made me think I'm not inventing this. And then I listen. And if she tells you to go away, I leave. Maya paused. Or I sit on her porch and listen harder. The cabin leaned in toward its own porch, a roof line like a brow. It had the air of a place that had chosen its loneliness instead of being stuck with it. A wind chime made from keys winked against the eave. The forest did that quiet thing it does when human footsteps change a path's grammar. The door opened before Maya knocked. The woman who looked out had the kind of face that grows from using it thoroughly, lined by laughter here, by concentration there, by walking into weather, without deciding it was an enemy. White hair escaped from a loose braid. Eyes observed first, greeted second. You're later than some, she said, voice like uncompromising tea. Earlier than others. Come in, leave your shoes. The floor prefers it. Inside, the walls wore paper, not wallpaper, in the sense of flowers repeating themselves into madness, but sheets and sheets of notes stuck up with pins and tape. Arrows migrated from one page to another. Some lines ran true and some bent without apology. Drawings lived beside equations, as if invited to the same party and found common topics anyway. You're Elise Voss, Maya said, because sometimes saying a thing interrupts the sense that you might be dreaming it. The woman nodded once, tired of names, but patient with their uses. You're one of the aware ones, or you're in love with one, or you fear you might be, or you want to be, and shouldn't. She looked at Sarah with a glance that held curiosity and no judgment. Tea? They sat at a table that had hosted arguments and apples. The tea steamed and smelled of something that had grown close by. Tell me your symptoms, Voss said, also tired of euphemism. Tell me the shape of your nights. Maya did. She kept it clinical until she couldn't. She spoke of geometry softening, of breath pausing, of tallness that wasn't cruel and wasn't kind and might be lonely. She did not speak of how relief sometimes followed fear, the way pain followed when a limb fell asleep and woke. Voss listened the way a person listens for the sound under the sound. When Maya finished, the older woman stood and touched a note pinned above the kettle. The gap, she said casually, as if one named a neighborhood. The space between waking and sleep with the capital, the clean corridor connecting them. Normally you pass through unconscious and nothing catches. Sometimes you look. Sometimes you see that it's not a corridor, but a city. A city, Sarah said, with citizens. Tenants, caretakers, scavengers. Voss splayed her fingers. Watchers, feeders, collectors. The first are curious, the second subsist, the third. She looked at the window as if it contained an answer she didn't want. Hungry in a way that grows systems around their hunger. Maya felt the shape of that phrase settle like a cool coin in her hand. You've been there a lot. Enough to know the exit sign isn't always where you left it. Voss poured more tea. Do not linger at the threshold while watching the threshold. That's like looking in a mirror with a mirror behind you. You'll get hallways where there shouldn't be hallways. You published once, Maya said softly. Then you disappeared. Publishing is a way to invite certain kinds of attention, Voss said. Some attention is like sun. Some is like the light a deep-sea fish makes to lure smaller fish. I chose the forest. She tapped a photograph pinned by the door. A young woman lay in a hospital bed, eyes closed, hand turned palm up like someone listening. My daughter is a citizen there now, not by choice. Silence moved in politely and sat at the table with them. I'm sorry, Sarah said, because compassion is a reflex in certain good people. She went too deep, Voss said. Curiosity is a path with bad lighting. The things we most want to know often live near missing staircases. She turned back to Maya. You've met a watcher. That's fortunate as these things go. They're old. They're tired of being alone. They understand the architecture better than we will. But remember this. The longer you stare at them, the clearer you become to the others. The feeders? Are they harming us? Sarah asked. I felt, well, I didn't feel anything, but Maya thinks. They sip, Voss said. Not out of malice. Imagine the way moss pulls water from stone. Dreams are a great river. A drop here and there won't drown you. The collectors, though. She pinched the bridge of her nose. They prize conscious awareness. They make farms. The word tasted wrong coming out of her mouth. And the gap is larger than the seconds you feel. Time makes a different shape there. Maya looked up at the diagrams of stacked rectangles and spirals leaning on their elbows. Can you show me how to move without falling? Voss regarded her for a long heartbeat, long enough for the kettle to cluck as it cooled. I can show you what I have learned, which is also what I have broken. She pried a small device from a box, electrodes, a hummingbird of a sensor. Wear this. If you're in the transit longer than is kind, it yells. It might not reach you there, but it will reach the people who can pull your body back. She handed over a notebook half full of careful maps drawn like a person trying to sketch the ocean. Mark what you notice. Rhythms, smells, distortions. If you can move an elbow, move it toward noise. The gap hates clatter. It's shy about intrusion. Voss's mouth twitched. Sing, if you can. Off-key helps. Your daughter's name, Maya said, because the photograph's caption had been a date, but no label. Catherine. The word arrived with too many letters. If you see her... No, listen. I am not asking you to look for her. If you see her, tell her I put the wind chime up and the keys still ring. They left with the device and the maps, and a weight that was equal parts burden and ballast. In the car, Sarah gripped the wheel as if it might do something foolish. We do this carefully, she said. We set timers. We use the loudest alarm known to humankind. We leave the lamp on because I said so. Maya nodded. She looked at the trees sliding by and thought of all the bedrooms hidden in them, all the breaths held and released, all the borders crossed without ceremony. She felt watched, the way you feel seen by a friend in a crowded room, not spied upon, accompanied. When they reached home, the evening laid itself out the way evenings do when they have to earn trust back. They cooked. They argued gently about the best pan for eggs. They watered the plant with the celebrity leaves. At last, the night said now. Maya set the device to scold at 90 seconds. She tucked the maps under the pillow like a child hides treasure and decided to pretend that was superstition rather than strategy. Sarah touched her forehead like a blessing and lay down close enough that their knees spoke a warm, legible language. Maya drifted. The seam approached, delicate and sure. She made the small mistake on purpose. The room loosened, courteous as ever. The corner filled with attention. The watcher tipped its head. She tried to shape a single hello, not with lips, but with the part of the mind that waves at dogs from windows. What came instead was an image from the watcher, a shoreline crowded with sleeping forms lit under the ribs with low light, each one's breath drawing the tide a fraction in and out. Then the filaments brightened. They led outward, through the wall, through the city, into other rooms, other beds, other hospitals. She followed with her eyes and felt the tug of something like a network that didn't want to be called that. The alarm began to whine very far away. The watcher's attention tightened. She tried to move and found a whisper of elbow. She knocked the headboard once, a sound like a spoon dropped in a sink. The room shivered. The watcher drew back an inch, not fearful exactly, but acknowledging the introduction of noise. She knocked again. The alarm found her like a dog finds its person when words fail. The world snapped. She returned. Sarah's face hovered like mercy. 90? She said, voice shaking around the number. You were gone 90. I was here, Maya said, because both were true, and the truth sometimes comes in stacks. She wrote until her hand cramped, until the words were tired enough to sleep. Filaments a grid, toward many sleepers, noise disrupts. Elbowed power bell watcher, lonely curiosity. Not friend, not enemy breath. Pause dangerous. Time lengthening there. When she put the pen down, the plant on the dresser looked like a plant on a dresser. The corner looked like geometry behaving itself. Still, her sternum remembered the weight that isn't a weight, and the word farm had placed itself gently on the table and waited. Morning bent itself into a list. Maya checked the sensor's battery, retaped the electrode leads, set 3 alarms with redundant names. Bell, bigger bell, absolutely not. She texted David a sentence that tried to be casual and ended up exact. Running a longer trial tonight, 30 90-second stratified holds, report to follow. He sent back a thumbs up and a skull, which in their language meant, I hate this, but I'll be here. All day the city performed competence. Buses arrived, crosswalks beeped, servers delivered plates like magicians revealing their next trick. The ordinary is a lullaby if you let it be. She let it as best she could, until evening folded its napkin and the quiet came out. Sarah set a bowl of salt by the bed, a superstition borrowed from her grandmother, who borrowed it from hers. For the bad luck, she said, eyes wry, or for the slugs, whichever wanders in. Both are excellent to deter, Maya said, grateful for the ritual. They lay down. The device's green light winked its readiness. The lamp stayed on, throwing a soft cone that kept the corner honest. Maya breathed to 4, held to 4, let go to 6, the box of calm she'd learned in a class on stress management and stubborn hearts. She let the seam arrive. The room's edges softened. The clock's red digits smeared into a small comet before steadying. The lamp stretched like warm taffy, and the corner unfolded into more air than geometry had any right to hold. The watcher was present as presence before she could name it. Tallness with patience poured over it. A museum guard who never tires. She kept her mind receptive, the way a field leaves a gate open for wind. Curiosity opened like a hand offered without insistence. The watcher tipped its head. The not language of feelings bracketed her, the oldness of rainy stone, a dog waiting at a door it has known for years, the ache of long corridors and polished floors. Maya tried a movement and found a sliver of control in her left wrist. She dragged knuckles quietly against the sheet. The alarm's logic registered motion and stayed asleep. Good. She wanted long. She wanted to learn the curve of the place. Filaments brightened and arranged themselves into a soft, living diagram. She saw them kiss Sarah's temple, touch her own brow, drift outward into the building, the block, the district. Sip, sip, like minnows nibbling skin at a lakeside dock. Not malice, she told herself, more like photosynthesis. Draw in, release. Minutes placed themselves in a neat line. 30 seconds, 45. The watcher moved closer, but not as approach so much as if the room grew. The attention it offered had weight without pressure. Picture, a lighthouse, seen from water. Picture, a child standing on a chair to watch you make tea. Then an image flowered, not hers. A ceiling from long ago, the plaster rosette above a girl's bed. Snowlight making its own geometry. She felt the sensation of having been observed then kindly from a distance that didn't ask anything. It tucked under her sternum like a coin warmed between palms. 65 seconds, 70. The edges of the bedroom thinned, revealing the palimpsest underneath. Hallway over hallway, rooms that didn't belong to them superimposed for a breath and gone. She followed one of those bright paths by looking alone and landed briefly in a stranger's living room. A couch with a crocheted blanket, a lamp with fringe, a man asleep open-mouthed with a cat on his ribs pulsing with purr. A feeder floated like seaweed in tide water near his head, sipping at the day's sediment. Not cruel, not kind. Necessary in a way that left room for gratitude if you squinted. 90 seconds. The device stirred, a distant bird. Maya tried to see whether she could direct the glance. The watcher offered a suggestion instead. A stare not seen, but felt. A down that wasn't distance so much as depth, measured in attention. She nodded in her mind, and the room consented to a small descent. The silk of the moment changed, the temperature altered by a degree too precise to announce itself. Layers, she thought, and pictured the cross-section of a hill in a child's science book. She tucked a marker. The air here hummed faintly, the sort of tone you notice only when it stops. The filaments thickened, a rust smell like a storm chewing on a nail. 95. The device began to whine, a polite siren. She tapped the headboard once with her knuckles to promise the room she would go. The watcher moved that small, not quite movement that might have been a nod and might have been the wall breathing. Return was a string pulled gently by a friend. She broke the surface of the room like a swimmer, lamp steady, corner behaving, Sarah's hand already on her forearm. 105, Sarah said, voice trembling around relief. You took me for a walk through every worst-case scenario. I kept saying your name. You were somewhere between here and a hum. I saw a living room with a crocheted blanket, Maya said softly, because bringing back something ordinary felt like proof. They lay awake for a while, Richmond noises drifting up from the street, laughter, a bottle in a bin, a car that was proud of its muffler. When sleep finally took them both, it did it quickly, with the tenderness of a tired parent. Night 3 found them cautious, but committed. Maya lengthened the hold to 2 minutes, then 3, stepping down shallow stairs, counting like she might count landmarks on a beloved walk. Hum here, smell there, the shape of the filaments changing, as if minds further out were turning in sleep to the other side. She learned to move her eyes in ways that moved her body's echo. She learned that noise, metal against wood, voice lifted, rippled the gap like a pebble in still water, disrupting structures that preferred smooth passage. And when, at the smooth edge of 3 minutes, the watcher sent a tremor of alarm through the air, she honored it and rose. Her return was like threading a narrow path home in fog. After, she wrote, Night 3. Hold 3 of depth markers. Hum, rust, smell, thicker, filaments noise. Tool watcher communicates via image feeling, consistent presence others present at mid-depth. Avoid ladders of angle. She circled ladders of angle twice, having no words for the sight yet. She could still see the fancy of geometry the gap liked. Stairs that leaned into themselves, angles that refused to add up to a square. Sarah read over her shoulder and kissed the spot where her collarbone made a small cup. "We're learning," she whispered. "We're making this make sense. I like the part where you stop." "I like the part where you're here," Maya said, and meant it like an oath. Chapter 6. Lines on a map, lines in the body. On night 5, the watcher drew nearer than it had before. Nearness wasn't distance, but clarity. The sense of seeing more of a shape you couldn't outline anyway. The feeling was of being photographed by an old camera with a long exposure time. The room had to hold still for the image to take, and in that stillness, truth emerged. Maya felt the communication gather like weather. The first thought form arrived cool and careful. An image of her childhood bedroom ceiling again, but this time not from the bed. She felt it from the corner, as if hovering near the crown molding, while a 6-year-old held her breath to hear the heating pipes click. She watched her smaller self decide not to cry. The attention attending her then felt identical to the attention attending her now. Age fell off the world like loose paint. A second image. Bus windows, the aisle leaning too long at dusk. Her teenage self thinking of exam. And a classmate's laugh and the smell of rain in concrete. Again, the corner held a patient shape, curious and reticent, watching with neither claim nor hunger. A third, graduate school fatigue on a library couch. The stacks leaned inward like companions trying to whisper. The presence then had been shy and old and a little lonely. That loneliness landed in Maya's chest with a small thud. "I know you," she thought, and the thought made a light. Not you as in a single thing, she corrected herself, but this specific attention, like a particular chord played in a particular room. The watcher answered, not with words, but with a slow relief. If attention could unclench, it did. She tried something a little foolish. She pictured a hand held out palm up in greeting. The watcher did not take the hand. It sent back the image of a key tied to a string. Access offered. Tether insisted upon. She thought of the wind chime at Voss's cabin, of the way keys sound when they tap. Time lengthened the way sap pulls long. 5 minutes arrived with the same small whine in the device's throat. The watcher's attention altered, tense now, like water pulling taut before it spills. Filaments brightened as if bracing against a weather front. Another thing moved in the room's deeper geometry, not the feathery feed of the dream sippers, not the quiet library of a watcher's gaze. This had angles, and it altered the air as if rearranging furniture you couldn't see. Maya thought, not tonight. She retreated, as one might retreat from a cliff edge, not because the view is wrong, but because the wind shifted. The return left a hollow in her bones, a small winter. You went white, Sarah whispered, thumb steady on Maya's wrist. "You came back like someone had called your name from very far away." "I think I almost met one of the other ones," Maya said. "We need more boundaries." She wrote "no deeper" without anchor in block letters and underlined it 4 times. They introduced more rules. Sarah read them aloud like vows. "Lamp on. Knock if stuck. Say my name. I'll say yours. Return on alarm. Pluses 30 seconds. No descents after midnight before work. Eat something warm before bed. And," Sarah added, "kiss me like we're putting a stamp on a letter we absolutely need delivered." They honored the rules, and the rules honored them back. Night by night, Maya traced the first 3 levels Voss had hinted at. The near-surface shimmer with its hum. The lower current with its rust smell and thicker filaments. The 3rd place where angles misbehaved and the air behaved like water that didn't want to be named. At that 3rd depth, she saw the first body that wasn't a body anymore. A human shape dissolved to a suggestion, like chalk left in rain. The shape noticed her and reached, and in the reach she sensed a plea, not for rescue, but for recognition. "I am. Please write me down." She did. In the notebook, she wrote a page of descriptors, a sense of cinnamon, the idea of a red sweater, the weight of a ring on her right hand, the smell of diesel, a laugh that hitched on the first syllable. She dated it and drew a small square because part of her couldn't stop building grids. On daytimes, she ate more and tried to be kind to her body. Voss's device left adhesive ghosts on her temples. She wore like faint silver leaves until lunchtime. David watched the graphs pile up. "This is remarkable," he said softly, which in his mouth meant terrifying. "Your EEG's doing a jazz duet with REM. We don't see this. We shouldn't see this. And your oxygen dips." He swallowed a scientist's instinct to euphemize. "They make me want to carry you out to a lawn chair in the sun and forbid any further curiosity." "Curiosity doesn't take orders from the lawn chair," Maya said gently. "But I hear you." He pressed thumb and forefinger to his brow. "I'm setting tighter thresholds. If you dip again like that, I'll come over and be louder than the alarm. Consider that a medical intervention." "Consider it friendship," she said, and touched his sleeve. By night 8, the watcher began to answer simple questions with weather. Yes, as a woman. No, as the thin chill under a door. Danger, as a pressure change. And the scent an elevator makes when it opens on a floor you didn't choose. It showed her a thing that looked like a diagram of pipes under a city, but when she leaned in, she saw the pipes were people, sleepers, and the valves that opened and closed were tides of attention. Between the valves moved entities of different shapes and mandates. Some cleaned, some fed, some collected. She tasted metal. When she asked about collectors, the room cooled fast enough to make her eyes sting. The watcher's attention went tight. An image formed and warped. A figure that did not hold a shape, wearing faces like water, wears reflections. Motions that stuttered, as if filmed at odd intervals. A hand that was all hands. The emotion washed up like oil. It didn't mix, and the smell lingered. "Okay," she breathed in her throat so as not to disturb the air. "Okay." She stayed another minute to prove to herself she could, then surfaced on the knock. The alarm, the name Sarah sang into the seam. After, she ate toast with jam while the plant watched with inherent leaf judgment. "It's like walking along a river where some spots look sweet and some look like they'll take your feet," she said. "What do the dangerous spots smell like?" Sarah asked, because concrete helps. "Cold coin, old meat," Maya said, wrinkling her nose. "And the angles start failing math." Sarah shivered, then blocked it with a practical act. She put fresh batteries in the emergency flashlight. The world is full of both kinds of defense. Chapter 7. The Body Tells. The friend records by then. The waking cost had risen. Nosebleeds like a red signature after certain returns. A blank space at the end of a sentence she knew she should be able to finish. Once she stood in the kitchen and felt the fridge hum and recognized it, and then didn't, like a word said too many times. David saw it all. He laid out printouts like placemats on his office table. "Your heart rate variability looks like a picket fence in a windstorm. We're bumping into boundaries you don't get to redraw. Your brain is writing new music, and the rest of you didn't get the sheet." Maya stared at the cap's mirror image, herself under a net of sensors, mascara smudged to a smoky fog under her eyes. "I can stop," she said. He pointed at her stern, and then his face softened because he remembered who he was. "You can pause. Pausing is different than stopping. It's a rhythm, not a failure." He tapped a plot. "Tell me this. Do you feel watched when you're awake?" "Sometimes," she said, "but not like surveillance. More like when you know a tree has noticed you are under it and is deciding whether to drop a fir cone." David closed his eyes, pinching his nose bridge again. "Maya, I know," she said. "I hear myself." They made a plan that looked like an apology written to her neurons. No dissents more than 5 minutes. Recovery nights with deliberate dream, music before bed, a smell she loved, stories without teeth. Sarah read aloud from a book where nothing bad happened, except that the garden refused to sprout on schedule, and yet the shape of the nights tugged her back. Not obsession, she told herself. Inquiry. She repeated the word as if definitions could be charms. The watcher waited like a steady lamppost on a salt-slick street. She approached with gratitude, and that gratitude changed the air. This time the exchange, she had begun to call it that in her notes, capitalized like a proper noun, came faster. Image for image, feeling for feeling. She showed it a memory of learning to ride a bike. The moment the sidewalk rose to meet her and the hand at her back fell away, and she knew and didn't know she was alone. The watcher responded with a sensation like stepping from shade into sun. Then the air tightened. She felt it as pressure in her ears, and the filaments around Sarah brightened and drew in like startled anemones. The watcher's loneliness curdled into worry. The geometry in the corner thickened, as if greaves and gauntlets were being tugged on by a figure that never wore armor. The collector announced itself the way certain predators do, by the absence of small sounds. It slid into the room's wrong angles like mercury in a cracked thermometer. Stuttering motion, a blur not blur of faces, and that smell of cold coin suddenly in her mouth. It turned all eyes' attention on her, and the attention wasn't curiosity. It was inventory. It saw her as a number and a brightness. Maya couldn't move. She remained tethered to the moment by the small threads of habit, the lamp's halo, the whisper of a car turning the corner outside, the warmth from Sarah's arm against hers. Fear came, then steadied, then made room for a choice. Noise. She needed noise. She dragged her elbow once, twice, against the headboard. The alarm took those knocks as music and lifted its voice. Sarah's name came Maya, and came again with widening vowels. David's code triggered down the hall, a bassy buzz that turned the room's silk to burlap. The collector's attention twitched, irritated, not deterred. The watcher moved with the slow force of an old river. Not toward the collector, not away, around. It changed the room's depth with the gravity of a full moon-changing tide. The angles softened. The stutter of the collector's motion grew less sure. Maya saw it then. The trick of leaving and the trick of being kept. The gap made departure simple if you didn't care where you landed. It made staying easy if you stopped asking what time meant. She asked, in the shape of a thought, for an exit that wore her name. The watcher answered by lengthening the filament that tied her to Sarah's sleeping body, thickening it to a rope. She took hold, not with hands, not with anything but will, at the hinge of her breath, and pulled. The rope burned. She did not let go. The collector flickered closer, interest brightening like a lab instrument deciding to wake. She returned with a snap that brightened the lamp into a star for a white second. She sat up with the immediate, graceless breath of a newborn, coughing like someone who had been under for too long. Sarah had her by the shoulders, voice calling her name down a long hall. David's shadow filled the doorway, hair a silhouette of scandal. "It saw me," Maya whispered, throat a scraped thing. "It saw me. It made a list and put me on it." Silence held for a heavy beat, while the room remembered it was a room. David moved, professional in a way that interrupted the spiral, checking pupil reaction with a pocket light, counting pulse, watching the oximeter numbers climb back up their little hill. "That's enough," he said quietly, tone like a hand on a stove knob. "We regroup. You don't go alone again. We add noise. We layer anchors. And we talk to Voss about the things with bad math." Sarah pressed her forehead to Maya's temple and stayed there, breathing the same small patch of air until both their breaths sorted themselves into partnership again. Later, after water and a slice of bread like a treaty, Maya wrote, "First confirm collector presence, Jack stutter motion, faces as water, inventory attention watcher, alter depth, room's viscosity, change noise useful, not sufficient filament anchor to S, clock's lifeline, post-return hypoxia plus tremor, duration 420, there, 0, oral. Here, she didn't write the part where she'd felt briefly exactly how it would be to be held in place by a system that saw her as a battery. She didn't know how to make that safe on paper. She slept shallow as puddles the rest of the night, waking at each small sound to frown at the corner and thank it quietly for behaving. In the morning, rain lined the windows and made the city look washed and serious. Maya called her mother's facility on impulse, on tenderness, on the suspicion born in rooms where angles fail. She asked about Lynn's nights, whether she moved in them, whether any monitors had blipped. The nurse on duty said everything looked ordinary, then admitted that ordinary could be a disguise like any other. Maya hung up, looked at Sarah, and changed the plan without using the word plan. "I want to see Mom," she said. Sarah laced her boots. "Then let's go." They left the apartment with alarms and notebooks and a resolve that felt like a thin blade and a thick rope in equal measure. On the elevator down, someone's child sang to a stuffed fox. The tune lodged itself in Maya's throat like a protective charm. At the curb, David texted, "I'm meeting you there. Don't start without me." and added a fox emoji, which made her laugh into the gray morning. Chapter 8. The door that opens when you're still. The care facility kept its halls warm enough to soften the edges of everything. Vines printed on wallpaper climbed immobile trellises. A dispenser sighed out foam the color of magnolia petals. Nurses moved with that practiced kindness that made wheels on carts and words on tongues both quieter. Lin Chen's room held a bright window and the practical beauty of objects that are easy to clean. Maya paused at the threshold the way you do when scent knocks you back into a younger body, lotion, laundry, something lemon, something metallic. She loved her mother the way rivers love low ground, inevitable, shaped by it. 8 years had taught her a new grammar for that love. "Hi, Mom," she said, and smoothed the blanket, even though it didn't need smoothing. Sarah put a small pot of chrysanthemums on the sill like a candle that had decided to be a plant. David set his bag on the chair and produced electrodes with the affection of a magician greeting the handkerchiefs. "Vitals are steady," the nurse had said. "She knows your voice, I think." Her eyes follow sometimes. We talk to her in case we're wrong about what she can't hear. Maya touched her mother's wrist, that delicate sidewalk where veins approached the surface. "I'm going to do a fool thing," she whispered, "but a careful fool thing. I brought loud friends." David fitted the censer with the tenderness of someone placing a crown. "If your oxygen dips, I'll kick the door down," he said. "If your heart rate looks like it wants to dance the wrong dance, I'll pull the plug on the music." Sarah set her own phone to alarm a symphony and kept Maya's hand inside both of hers. "I'm here," she murmured. "Follow the sound of my voice like we're kids in a pool." Maya lay on the cot the staff offered. The blanket was one of those institutional knits that always remembered a body that last warmed them. She watched the window shade wobble a small Morse code under the vent's breath. She let the seam arrive. Rooms like that are built to discourage edges. The transition slipped over her scalp like a cool cloth. The open geometry kept quiet at first, as if evaluating the space for echoes. Then the air thickened the way water does when you wade past the waist. The watcher rose in the corner, height unoffended by fluorescent light. It presented attention like the offering of an umbrella. Maya inclined her mind in greeting and pictured a key on a string. The watcher sent back the faint chime of metal on metal from very far away. Filaments here were busy and bright. Hospitals have that effect. The dreams of many people plaited into a rope choir. She looked toward her mother's bed and saw the threads woven densely over Lynn's brow, bright as if lit from within by a memory insisting on itself. The threads were taut, not sipping gently, but holding. Maya stepped, which is to say she thought herself closer, and found herself at the head of Lynn's bed, but in the Gap's version, where the bed was both the bed and an outline of the bed taken from a textbook. The space around it widened into dimensions no builder had signed off on. In that extra air stood a woman who was her mother in the way a melody is its own old recording. Lynn turned and saw her, and the recognition hit like spring thaw. Her face arranged itself around a laugh that was almost a sob, and then she was holding Maya's wrists with hands that remembered hands. They both felt the small shock of touching where touching hadn't been possible. "You see me," Lynn said, voice bright and cracked, the way porcelain sings when tapped. "You can see me?" "I can," Maya said, and the words fell from her mouth like stones nicking water. "I'm here." Lynn gathered her like a person gathers a scarf in wind, impossibly careful and endlessly certain. "Time is a thing with bad manners here," she said into Maya's hair. "I've been long. I've been a minute. They keep the clock in another room." Maya pulled back enough to see her mother's eyes, the same brown her own wore on tired days. "Why didn't you tell me?" She heard the child in it and refused to be ashamed. "Why didn't I know?" "It's a hard thing to say in a voice that can't move lips," Lynn said gently, "and I hoped it would end the way a cough ends. Then I hoped you wouldn't turn your head this direction. Then I told you, in dreams, badly." She smiled like a fragile blade. "You were always looking where the light thinnest was. I should have known." The room breathed. A shape touched the far edge of air, one of the soft feeders pausing near Lynn's temple, and Lynn flicked her attention at it like a hand wave. "Later, please." It drifted with the old patience of seaweed. "Mom," Maya said, because the word needed saying. "Who keeps you?" Lynn's glance tilted, and the gravity of the question altered the floor. "The collectors." The air cooled by a degree. The smell of cold coin woke in Maya's mouth. Her mother didn't flinch, which was worse than flinching. "They prize awareness," Lynn said. "They like brightness. They string us up and drink a letter at a time until the word says nothing." She nodded toward the wall, and Maya saw through it the way a creature might see under a leaf. Rooms connected like cells, a brightness pulsing to the rhythm of not quite a heart. Structures of attention built like scaffolds around sleeping bodies who had stayed too long paying attention. "Catherine is there," Lynn said. "So are men who said numbers for governments, and women who wrote poems that opened the wrong doors, and boys who got brave in the worst way. Dr. Voss carries tools to their fences and believes she's breaking them when she's tightening them. I love her, and I don't forgive her." A tone climbed, polite and far, the device beginning its fussy complaint. The watcher's attention sharpened as if it had put on glasses. "How do I get you out?" Maya asked. The question scraped. "Tell me and I will." Lynn's face, a map Maya had traced since infancy, bent around tenderness and steel. "You go home. You live well. You do not bargain. You do not promise things to anything whose face isn't a face. But if you refuse to obey me because you are my daughter and you never learned how, then listen. You can't tear the fence without startling the animals it protects. You must find a post. The post is deeper. It has another name some will try to forget. Core." Maya's breath went small. The watcher sent the faintest vibration, a sub-audible no. "The core isn't a place," Lynn said. "It's the pause that learned how to feed. It owns the between. It sent the collectors to market. If it unthreads, the ropes slacken." Her hand tightened on Maya's. "If you try, you must carry a path back, a song you can sing while drowning, anchors, many." "Can you come with me now?" Maya asked, already knowing the answer. "Not yet." Lynn smiled with one side of her mouth like she always had. "I am nodded. And look." She turned Maya's head the way a mother does, gentle, certain. Through the wall of the gap room, in the deeper level where angles decided to stop behaving, a collector leaned on the air like a bouncer who could be patient all night. It was wearing the shapes of faces from a deck shuffled too quickly. It had the air of someone who had been alerted by a bell only it could hear. The alarm in the other room rose its little hills. Sarah's voice came thin through a tunnel, calling Maya's name with ordinary syllables that felt like rope. Lynn pressed their foreheads together. "Go now," she said. "Go brave later if you insist, but go now." Maya nodded, grabbed the filament that tied her to the sound of Sarah and the smell of hospital soap and the warmth in her mother's palms, and pulled. The return caught and slid like a ring over a knuckle. She gasped awake to fluorescent wine, and the two people she trusted breathing like they'd been submerged. David's face was pale with anger. He was translating into care. Sarah's cheeks were wet. 20 minutes, David said, in the steady voice he kept for rooms like this. "You took a long lap." Maya looked at her mother's body, the human part on this side, and saw nothing change. Then, as if in answer to a secret question, Lynn's eyelids fluttered. Once, twice, a slow tear gathered, unsure of gravity. It fell. "Mom?" Maya breathed, because small words do sometimes get to be miracles. No more movement came, but the tear had been a yes at the scale Lynn was permitted. It was enough. They stayed until the world asked them politely to let the nurses work. In the hallway, Voss called back on the first ring. She listened to the summary and went quiet the way snow goes quiet when it hears its own weight settling. "Do not go hunting on a hospital floor," she said. "Walls echo. The collectors like those acoustics." "I know where the fence is," Maya said. "I think I know where the post is." Voss's breath sounded like hands folding maps shut. "Then we must teach you to climb without falling into your own pockets. Say continue for the next chapter." Chapter 9. The Room with Too Many Floors. Preparation makes the body feel safe. Plans make the mind pretend it is. They made both. David invented redundancies until redundancies felt inadequate and then kept inventing. Sarah taped a list to the wall that would shame any failing courage. Call David, ice packs, loud songs, knock, kick, name. Voss came to the apartment with a bag that looked like it had carried books and contraband and apples. She refused coffee and accepted soup. She touched the wind chimes Sarah had hung from the curtain rod. Keys found in drawers. Duplicates. "Good," she said. "The gap resents certain clatters." They tested the alarms until the neighbors texted kindly to ask whether the fire department should be involved. They added a new trick, a headset. David tuned to a frequency somewhere between bedside machine and friendly refrigerator. "It's obnoxious," he said cheerfully. "So are a lot of things that save your life." Voss's last gift came in a case the size of a glasses box. Maya lifted the lid and saw a syringe, a vial. The liquid had the opalescent shimmer of something that didn't want to pick a color. Voss's mouth flattened. "My compound," she said. "It disrupts patterned fields. In theory, it can make structures in the gap less stable. It could also make you less stable. So you will forgive me if I tell you not to use it until the house is already on fire." Maya turned the vial under the lamp's patient glow. "And you?" she asked quietly. "How do you carry it?" Voss looked at the chime. "With prayer," she said, "not as religion, but as craft. An act performed with careful hands in a room where sound matters. And with rules I have broken and regretted. I am not your example. I am your warning label." Sarah squeezed Maya's hand. "We do this because we have to," she murmured, "but we also stop if we must." They went to bed as if to a loading dock, deliberate, suited, surrounded by equipment that made the room look like a misplaced clinic. The lamp held its cone. The keys shivered on air currents. The city outside made its nocturne. Maya let sleep approach and did not blink. The seam trod softly onto her skin. The corner opened like a patient instrument case. The watcher stepped into its attention, taller than fear and older than names. Maya felt gratitude the way you feel a hand on a boat's rope. She moved. No, she allowed movement to the second depth, where the hum sat like a bee's memory, then to the third, where the rust smell tasted like rain on coins, then to the place under that, where angles gave up and did slow somersaults of indecision. The filaments grew bright as wire. Noise from the other side came wrapped in wool, but present. The thin whine of a frequency David had tuned to irritate the ancestors. "Show me," she asked the watcher gently. "Not the farm." She felt it flinch at the word and softened her tone. "Show me the road to the post." The room's depth shifted without her consent in the way a river shifts when it remembers an old bank. The watcher turned its attention like a lantern into a stare that hid its until you looked at it sideways. Maya let her gaze slip, and the stare brightened. Impossibly shallow risers that were more an agreement than a construction. She took them. The smell changed to something like library paste and ozone. The air went full of fine particulate she knew wasn't dust, just as knowledge that isn't a book isn't less reading. She became aware, at the edge of awareness, of rooms upon rooms next to hers, other sleepers hovering in their own thresholds, some alone, some not, some with quiet guardians in their corners, some with the absence that rings where a guardian ought to be. The stair ended in a room that had too many floors. She stood on one and saw 3 more below, a good carpenter's nightmare. Each held arrangements that obeyed a logic that refused to explain itself, funnels of attention leading somewhere not visible, lattices of threads converging on a shape that made the back of her teeth hurt to look at. She understood this much. The collectors had organized the gap the way a beekeeper organizes bees, into frames and cells, into labor shaped to purpose. The watcher's attention dimmed, not in power, but in daring. It had come to the letter of its courage and would not cross it. Maya felt respect like the shift of a coat worn to the perfect weight. "Thank you," she thought. "Stay." A motion down one floor stuttered. The collector from the hospital turned its blur in her direction as if its senses were a fan sweep in a room. It didn't see her yet. It would. 4 floors down, a glow pulsed like bioluminescent plankton concentrated around a weight in water. She felt the word before she thought it. Post. David's frequency wrapped around her bones, obnoxious in a way that reminded her of high school gym whistles. She tucked it into a mental pocket, the way you tuck a key into your shoe. Then she did the thing she had promised not to do unprepared. She went deeper. The rope to Sarah burned sweet in her palms. She knew where it was. She knew what it meant. She believed, with the hasty faith of the cornered, that she would find it again. The lower floor accepted her as a shadow accepts a passing cloud. The smell of cold coin intensified. The collector's infrastructures here looked like webs built by mathematicians with a grudge. The brightness at the center held no metaphor would do. It was attention made object. It pulled on her mind the way a story pulls on a child who doesn't want bedtime to end. The thing we call core isn't a thing, she recited inside herself like a lesson. It is a function. It is the shape hunger took. She almost fancied she heard it notice her, like hearing your name spoken in a noisy room by someone on the other side of a wall. The filament to Sarah twanged, as if a finger had plucked it experimentally. "Don't!" she thought back along the string, and in the thought she tightened every muscle awake bodies have, and sleeping bodies imitate. The frequency David had given her, she turned it up by wanting it. The room's silk wrinkled. The watcher above sent down a pulse that tasted like worry and old rain. Time wore its trick hat, seconds stacked into a minute that felt arthritic. Maya laid her eyes on the brightness at center and felt the profound discourtesy of being acknowledged by something that does not owe acknowledgment. "Oh," it said, not in words, and yet there they were. "Oh, you." It liked the shape of her consciousness, the way a collector likes a new stamp for his book. The impression she received came with a hunger that had taught itself patience for millennia and had never had to learn. No? She pulled gently on the rope to Sarah. It held. She pulled a little harder. The rope heeded to warning. The collector, one floor up, turned in her direction, interest becoming intent. She marked the side as if she could draw it with a blunt pencil later. The funnel, the lattice, the brightness that was not light, the places where the web attached to something that smelled like old ocean and soot. "This," she told herself fiercely, "is not the last time I see this. This is reconnaissance. This is a glance, not a stare." She retreated, as if backing out of a swarm, slow, steady, polite, not because she wanted to be polite, but because the gap had rules about certain exits, and they resembled etiquette. On the floor above, the collector paused, as if it had misplaced a sound it liked. It lifted faces to where she had been and failed to find her. She had to hold the laugh in with both hands for fear of wringing the air. The stare acknowledged her obedience by continuing to exist. She reached the level where the watcher waited. It tilted its tallness. It radiated a question. Why? She sent back Lynn's face, the tear, the word post. The rope burned a little lighter. Return waited like a warm coat by a door. She put it on. She surfaced into lamplight, and the sound of Sarah humming under her breath, the silly song the child in the elevator had sung to the fox toy. "You were gone 6 minutes," Sarah said, and the number felt like a bed offered after a long drive. "You smiled weird. I wanted to throw a shoe at you to make sure you still had a sense of humor." Maya drank water and wrote by muscle memory, hand moving like an oar. Room, Ras, too many floors. Collector scaffolds, funnel toward central brightness post. Triast, function, not object. Lattice attachment smelled of soot. Ocean frequency nest. Useful. Rope to S. Cras intact watcher limit. Won't cross into floor 4 next. Anchor layers. Go W. Noise. Voss sat at the edge of the bed like a person attending a chess game played by weather. "You saw it from the threshold," she said, voice thin. "You must not let it see you from there for long. You do not want to be a favorite. Favorites end up framed." "I think it understood me as a shape," Maya said. She almost laughed at how inadequate that sounded. "Not as a person, as a taste." Voss closed her eyes. "That's worse. Say continue for the next chapter." Chapter 10. Inventory of Anchors, Inventory of Courage. They had 3 days before the next descent, not by rule, but by the body's insistence. Maya filled them with ordinary on purpose. She bought clementines at the corner market. She sat on a bench and watched a dog decide whether to trust a jean-jacketed teenager with a skateboard. She changed the sheets, which felt like a healing spell. She took her mother's hand and told her about a pot of chrysanthemums in a window the color of a kinder sky. At night, she allowed only surface passings. The watcher waited and did nothing but be present. Even that had an effect. The way sitting with someone in a hospital waiting room does something to the air you could never write on any chart. David fiddled with code like worry threaded through keyboards. He came over with a coil of cable and a hopeful grin. "I tuned the obnoxious tone," he announced. "It's now scientifically calibrated to make the gap itch. Patent pending." "Patent denial pending," Sarah said, smiling a little despite herself. Voss stood quiet until the room needed saying. "You must plan exit as if you're already drowning," she said. "Do not count on curiosity to carry you. Do not count on intelligence. Count on the stupid, practical things. Ice on your skin, your name said by a voice you know, a sound that makes the gap decide to be somewhere else." So they built an inventory and spoke it aloud, each item a bead on the string. Physical anchors, ice packs against palms and nape, TENS unit pads ready to sting at a button, lemon oil in a small vial to press under nose on return. Sound anchors. Sarah's voice reading a handful of lines they both knew by heart. David's frequency, the door chime app Voss had recommended, tuned too bright. Time anchors, alarms at 5, 10, 15, a hard stop at 30, non-negotiable. Identity anchors, a photograph on the nightstand of a particular morning, their faces crumpled with laughter because Ripple had stolen a pancake. A note in Maya's own handwriting that said, "You are a daughter, a lover, a friend, a body. Come back to them." Sarah suggested one more. "Food," she said simply, "the body remembers. We give it something worth returning to." She made congee with ginger and scallion and black vinegar that made their noses argue and then forgive. On the third night, Maya told the watcher before she told herself. In the quiet vocabulary they'd learned together, she shaped the feeling of "I'm going and I'm asking you to stand by," as if you were the night itself. It answered with a weather of sorrow and consent, and then something else. Resolve, perhaps. It had always been the librarian and never the guard. Tonight it would not be the guard, but it would hold the door. Maya lay back. She breathed to 4, to 6, to 8, like she was walking down a staircase she couldn't see and trusted anyway. The seam arrived. The lamplight stretched but did not break. The keys lifted the smallest breath. The room opened its extra air. She took the first stair by naming it the first stair, and that worked. Names are doors if you don't use them like keys. Depth 1, hum. Depth 2, rust smell. Depth 3, misbehaving angles. Depth 4, the room with too many floors. She stood on her floor and saw the lower ones tilt in a way that suggested a tension under them. The brightness pulsed. Collectors moved like errors in a video, skipping forward in frames. David's frequency sat around her bones like an ugly sweater that loves you. She stepped down to the third floor with caution that lived in the soles of her feet, even if she had no feet here. The lattice's funnels thrummed in a rhythm that pulled on the mind's curiosity, the way certain drums pull on hips. She looked for the attachments to soot and ocean. She found them. They looked like knots, like places where rope had been burned and retied. They smelled like old ships and train stations. She recognized, without wanting to, a scent of hospitals from decades when a disinfectant had a different recipe. Old, she thought, older than us. Something in the brightness's attention twitched, which meant she'd brushed a whisker. She tightened her hand on the rope to Sarah. The rope answered with the warmth of a body she could describe blind. She pictured the taste of ginger, the precise sound Sarah made when she misread a word and corrected herself with a small laugh. She remembered the radiator in her childhood bedroom clicking before the heat came, the rise of warmth that felt like the world bending toward well. The collector on the next floor stuttered left, then right, like a radio hunting for a station. Voss's tone pushed at it like a broom from under a couch. It didn't like being nudged. It lifted faces toward Maya, and all the faces had the same eyes. They were not hers, and they were not nobody's. They were all the eyes that had ever fallen open in this place. Anchor, she thought. She knocked once, twice. The knocks hit the lattice like pebbles on taut canvas. Vibrations moved outward, interference lines complicating the neatness of the funnel. The brightness noticed in a way that made the skin of the world too small. It wasn't anger, it was interest sharpened into intent. Now, said a quiet, practical voice in her that sounded like Voss and Sarah and herself braided, now is when you deploy the ridiculous. She imagined not a scream, which the gap would swat aside like a moth, but a song. The silly fox song from the elevator. She had never been good at singing. Embarrassment was a luxury the night could not afford. She sang internally a child's nonsense about a fox going to school, off-key on purpose because Voss had told her the gap resented clatter. The sound moved weirdly. It fluffed the air. It made the brightness hesitate, the way a monarch might pause at an unfamiliar instrument in the parade. She took the hesitation and shoved sense through it. Post, she thought, attachment, knot. Her attention sharpened to a hot needle. She traced one soot-smell knot with her gaze until it revealed its weak line, a tie that had been retied often, a point of stress in any system. At that very moment, miles away and across time and down into older buildings and older nights, someone else would have called this a vulnerability. The brightness called it an irritation. It tried to heal around her attention by thickening its structure, by hiding in indeterminacy. She turned David's frequency up with will alone. She concentrated on being specific, not general, concrete, not fuzzy. She wanted to force definition the way light forces shadow, to pick a direction. The lattice around the knot began to quiver. She felt it not with fingers, but with that spot under the sternum where certainty collects. She tugged once, twice, on the rope to Sarah, so she would feel the burn and know it was there when she needed it. The brightness pulled back. She pulled forward. The world made a sound like static resolving into a station for half a second. And in that half second, the knot slipped. Only slips, not breaks, the right mind cautioned. Slips retie. But even slips hurt hands. The brightness flared, attention scoring her like a sunburn. The collectors stuttered in a halo as if someone had changed the frame rate of their existence. Maya tasted lemon and vinegar and salt. She thought of pancakes and pancake theft. She thought of her mother crying one tear as if gravity had been lent for a moment. She let go of the knot and grabbed the rope. The return had teeth tonight. It pulled at her by the soft parts. She moved anyway. The stairs agreed to be there. The watcher stepped to the side like a doorman who both approves and disapproves of your choices. She broke the surface of the bedroom like a diver who mistimed and still made the water. She sat up with a sound small children make when they're finally picked up. Sarah had her smelling of sleep in the kitchen. David had a hand on the tin's unit switch and did not need to use it. Voss stood like a lighthouse that had seen ships founder and ships return and knew that looking the same was not the same as being unchanged. "How long?" Maya asked. 7 minutes 20, David said, as if admitting a sin. "You have an economy class ticket to my disapproval." Maya laughed, a raw thing that cleaned the corners. "I think I slipped a knot." Voss's face did something a field does when wind passes over it. "Somebody felt that," she said. "Not just here, elsewhere. The nets attach in many rooms." Sarah pressed her forehead to Maya's and swore softly in relief. "Eat something," she said, "the oldest anchor." Maya ate. She sat with the taste of ginger and vinegar and love and tried to keep her hands from shaking. When she wrote the notes, the first line arrived without her permission. "We can make it choose a shape." She underlined it once, twice. In the metal rim of the lamp shade, her face looked like her face. She let herself study it anyway. Ears, hairline, a freckle near her jaw she'd always pretended was a small star. When she blinked, the reflection blinked with her. The keys made a tiny sound like patience rehearing its own name. Chapter 11, The Farm in the Running Morning, carried the mild triumph of a slipped knot and the dull ache of having tried. Maya's hands trembled pouring coffee. Sarah steadied the mug with a fingertip like a note held in harmony. David looked at the graphs, rubbed his eyes, and muttered something about peer review conducted by wolves. Voss stared at the window as if it might bring weather with answers. They decided on a rest day. Rest lasted until afternoon, when the world tilted minutely as if a coin under the leg of a table had been nudged. Maya felt it behind her ribs. The rope to Sarah, the quiet presence of the watcher, the room that is not a room, all thinned for a breath, and then returned. Somewhere a knot had retied. Somewhere patience had rewritten its terms. "Tonight," Maya said. "Quick in, quick out. I want to look at the fence you showed me, Mom." The care facility felt warmer than before, as if the building were trying to comfort itself. Lynn's bedside lamp made a small lake on the floor. The chrysanthemums had opened like they'd been told a secret. The nurse greeted them by name now. Attention was a kind of trust. Maya settled, alarms armed but merciful, the headset's ugly sweater sound ready. The seam arrived with the soft patience of habit. The watcher stood in the corner as though it had never been anywhere else. The hospital's gap air tasted sterile and crowded. Filaments braided and unbraided in industrious tides. Maya looked for the structure Lynn had indicated, the farm with its latticework, polite enough to hide itself from language. There, a brightness caged in geometry, and within that brightness, shapes that were people, Lynn, yes, but also others, their awareness pinned like specimen wings, their edges being sipped a letter at a time to feed a long appetite. She approached, tether-taut. The farm wasn't cruel in the way cruelty likes to show off. It was efficient. That was worse. Collectors moved along paths that weren't paths, but routines, their stutter step making the air catch. The sense of inventory returned, that cataloging gaze that had found Maya once and would find her again. She felt for the rope to Sarah, the weight of her name held in a familiar throat. She held it. Maya. Her mother's voice. Here, not from a bed, but from the inside-out geometry. Arrived thin as wire and stronger. I can speak only a thread, but I can speak. You slipped something. The feed stuttered. The room noticed. It has a longer memory than a person's, but shorter than a river's. We must be quick when it blinks. I'm here, Maya shaped, turning the thought to a weight. I see you. Lynn smiled with her eyes, the rest of her held by the architecture of hunger. Do not trade yourself. Do not try to switch places. It will agree to noble bargains and keep only the parts that taste good. Collectors turned. One, the same stutter motion from before, tilted many faces toward Maya. It held intent like a cup. The air lost a background hum. Small sounds fled. Fear came in clean and then left room for choice, noise. The fox song again off-key. The door chime app. David's frequency dragging a comb through the gap's fine hair. The lattice trembled, not enough to break, enough to complain. A collector nearest Lynn jerked, recalibrating its wrong muscles. The watcher did something it had not done. It stepped, not between Maya and the collector, but into the path of attention, the way a tall person blocks the sun so a child can see. Its presence, usually a gentle persistence, condensed into a slow force. Pressure changed. The smell of rain, polished metal arrived. Now, Lynn said, go. Live with the knowledge. Return when your rope can haul a mountain. Maya wanted to argue. The gap rewards arguments by tying bows in your shoelaces. She chose obedience like sitting when a wave tells you to sit. She retreated along the rope, the farm's geometry shrinking until it made no moral claims, the watcher holding the doorway like an old friend with a new job. She surfaced to the lamp, the lake of light on the floor, the real-world cough in the next room, Sarah's palm already warm atop hers. She spoke, Maya said after the numbers behaved again. Said the room blinked, said quick, not brave. That's my motto now, David said, queasy with relief. Quick, not brave. Voss's mouth thinned. Approval lived under too much weather. You don't win by wrestling hunger. You win by starving it of what it wants most. What it wants most is me, Maya said, half a joke that wasn't. Me and anyone else who won't look away. And we know how to be stingy, Sarah said. It's a family skill. We close the curtains, we count our spoons, we keep our lights for those who need them. She looked at Lynn's sleeping body with a softness that had bones. We will come back when our rope is a chain. That night, long after they'd returned to their own bed, Maya lay listening to pipes and small night traffic and the keys gently tapping each other when the heater kicked on. She let sleep take her without looking at it. Her last thought before it did was a simple inventory: hands, breath, name, keys, rope. Sometime near dawn, she dreamed of standing at a shoreline made of seconds, waves pushing strange shells to her feet, the kind that looked like ears, the kind that looked like question marks, the kind that looked like no one should pick them up. She left them there, which felt like wisdom. Say continue for the next chapter. Chapter 12. Men with files and rooms with locks. News about not slipping doesn't make the news. It travels sideways through people who keep their ears on strange rails. The man who called himself Marcus Reed arrived 2 days later, exactly on time, and somehow unannounced. He wore a retired suit and the kindness of someone who has chosen not to shoot the messenger that is himself. Dr. Chen, he said, and then to Sarah and David and Voss and friends. He set a slim case on the table with a ceremonial thud. The sound made the keys at the window titter. "Who sent you?" David asked. Body half curled around protectiveness, he pretended with skepticism. "Old work," Reed said. "Older rooms? I'm the last person you wanted to meet and the first you needed. Call it Project Threshold because we did. Started by people who should have known better and did for a while." He opened the case. Thin folders slept in it like the parts of a modest ghost. Timelines, diagrams that tried to look like nothing at all. Photographs with unfortunate corners, men and women asleep under nets of wire, a room whose walls had too many clocks, a spiral drawn in pencil so hard the paper had bruised. Maya didn't touch the picture, but her eyes did. "You trained people to go in," she said, and her voice couldn't decide whether to be accusation or catalog. "We did," Reed said. "We told them you could spy on a sleeping mind, ride its tides, collect secrets no room with locks could keep. We built machines to listen to the listening. We were very proud and very wrong." He smiled without humor. "By the time we figured out the gap wasn't a hallway but a house with owners, it had our forwarding address." He walked them through the bones. 23 operatives trained to walk the seam and keep their heads. 19 comatose. Elsewhere, Reed said, his mouth refusing the easy euphemism. 3 who ended their own stories. 1 who got out and stayed out, which was him. He didn't look like a victory. "What did you find?" Voss asked, though the diagrams on her walls already knew. "Not a place," Reed said. "A function. Your core. A hunger that learned economy. It sits where thoughts don't, pulling tax from every mind that passes by. The collectors are its clerks. The feeders are the pigeons we like anyway because they make the square feel lived in. The watchers? I never made sense of them. Librarians, maybe. Or just the house remembering its own blueprints." He rubbed the lines beside his mouth. "We tried to hurt it. It laughed at our best and turned our clever into dessert. We decided the fight costs more lives than surrender." "Not surrender," Sarah said, from the middle of the room where she kept her small, necessary fury. "A pause some people didn't get to consent to while you filed your files." Reed took the reproach with a tired gentleman's nod. "You're right. And still, we shut it down. We buried what we could. We lost most of what mattered." He slid a single sheet toward Maya. It had the feel of paper rescued from a flood. "This is the closest thing to a map of its attachments we ever made. They change. They prefer not to be maps. But the old points repeat." Maya saw what she'd already seen at the edge of depth 4. Knots that smelled of soot and ocean, of old disinfectant and train station benches. Places where the world had learned to pause. Ports, hospitals, border stations, the back rooms of old churches. Places where people wait and listen and are listened to by things older than cities. "Why me?" she asked, calm as she could, because calm made the question fit in her mouth. "Because you can look and not drown right away," Reed said. "Because you're bright in a way that makes a thing like that want to keep you. Because you have a rope and most people don't." He nodded toward Sarah, toward David, toward Voss, who accepted neither praise nor absolution. And perhaps because someone in that house has decided to help. He didn't say watcher. Sometimes it's best not to press a name into a thing. Voss had been quiet too long. She brushed the photograph of the spiral with a fingertip like blessing withheld. "The compound," she said abruptly to Reed. "If you'd had one to make a structure choose, would you have used it?" He looked at her with the professional sadness of men who have seen their own plans used by other hands. "We had worse," he said. "We used it. It bit us. If you have something that forces shape, count how many shapes you can tolerate before you're the one who's all angles." Maya felt the syringe's weight without touching it. The case sat where Voss had left it, plain, not dramatic, like a kitchen drawer that holds knives and rubber bands with equal patience. Reed closed his case as if endings could be polite. "I won't tell you not to go," he said to Maya, and his voice softened for the first time. "You will. You already have. But you hear me? You don't beat the house at its rules. You find a way to make a door where it forgot to plaster, and you don't go alone." After he left, the room recovered its houseness. Sarah dried a cup that wasn't wet. Sometimes the hands must do something to hold the heart in. David sorted cables until they lay like well-behaved eels. Voss watched the keys and, for once, did not advise. Maya stood at the window and looked at the city that had no idea it slept in a web. Buses moved. People argued gently over produce. Someone practiced trumpet 3 floors down. The ordinary laid its hand on her head. She breathed into it. "Quick, not brave," she said aloud, so the room would remember. "And together. Say continue for the next chapter." Chapter 13. The night we stacked the rope plans. Acquire gravity the moment you set them on a table. Every object in the apartment leaned in that night. Lamp, keys, notebooks, the plant who watched everything like a magistrate and waited to be included. They arranged the anchors until the list felt like a spell. Physical, ice packs readied in towels, lemon oil uncapped, Tan's pads applied, wires coiled to a button David would press if numbers went wrong. Sound. Sarah's voice, with a page marked in a book they'd read out loud until the words smelled like home. David's frequency staged ugly and ready, Voss's door chime app, volume at impolite. Time. Alarms at 5, 10, 15, 25. A hard stop at 30 written on paper and taped to the wall, not for the room but for them. Identity. The pancake photo, a note in Maya's own hand. You are Maya Chen, whose mother is Lynn, whose love is Sarah, whose friend is David, whose body is here. They added one more. Taste. Sarah balanced a spoon by the lamp, loaded with honey and lemon, and one silly sprinkle she'd shaken on with ceremony. "Come back for this," she said, as if bribing a child off a playground. Voss opened the case. The syringe lay within, chastened by its own possibilities. "If it turns," she said, "if the house laughs, this might make it pick a wall. It might make you pick one, too. I won't tell you yes, I won't tell you no." Something moved under her voice like old regret. Maya took the syringe and did not put it in her pocket. She set it on the nightstand between the photograph and the keys, a word among other words. "If I use it," she said, "I'll use it where my rope is thickest." They lay down. Sarah crawled close and set her palm where it had learned the map of Maya's ribs. "I'm here," she whispered, as if the phrase were the beginning and end of a catechism. David sat in the chair with his finger on a button that would sting if it must. Voss took the keys and made them sing once, a silver syllable. The watcher, when it came, would have to accept the theater. The house would have to endure it. Maya let the seam arrive. Depth 1, hum. Depth 2, rust. Depth 3. The angles that refused polite math. Depth 4. The room with too many floors. The brightness pulsed like a heart that had hired an orchestra. The lattices funneled the sleep of a city and a dozen hospitals and all the border stations that live in kitchens and bus stops and hearts. Collectors made their rounds in stuttered procession. The watcher's presence grew taut beside her, a height casting shadow over a road. Post? Maya thought. The stair admitted her. She descended into the air that tasted like old ships and antiseptic and rain at a station where your train is late, and you've made your peace with that. The knot she'd slipped called to her. A tooth you can't resist touching? She did not go there. New habits must be made bold. She traced another knot, one tied at some long-ago dock, where fishermen had told each other lies to keep fear company. It was retied so often, it had a memory. David's frequency sat in her marrow. Sarah's rope pulled with a steady warmth. Voss's door chime hovered like a rude bird ready to shriek. Now, she thought, though there was nothing dramatic about it. She didn't tug. She attended. She made the knot answer questions it didn't want to answer. Where are you fastened? Why this angle? When do you slip? What song loosens you? She sang in her head something very old and very simple, a tune her mother had hummed when noodles boiled over and life insisted on laughter anyway. The knot quivered, the lattice hesitated, the brightness sharpened its look. Oh, there you are, and the collectors bucked, their frames skipping, angry at being made to choose a rhythm. Maya waited for the door to slam. Instead, an opening. Not a break exactly, but negative space where the web had been. A vent, a breath. From the farm's depth, figures lifted, not bodies, not yet. Awarenesses shifting like birds in fog. She felt her mother, the exact taste of her steadiness. She felt others, a girl with chalk dust on her cuffs, a man who'd counted numbers for the wrong men and wanted to be just a human again. A laugh she'd recorded from the dissolving shape 2 nights ago. They brightened, trembled, reached. The brightness noticed, and its interest turned from hunger to anger. That is, from inevitability to surprise, which is the only anger with teeth. The world went very still. The rope to Sarah hummed. The rope to Sarah sang. But the brightness reached with 1,000 careful hands and plucked at the rope as if at a harp. Sarah's name wavered, went thin, went tinny. Now, said Voss's voice from the margins of Maya's mind, not as a command, but as a witness. If you must. Maya grabbed the syringe in the mind space where you grab things you've decided to touch without thinking. She did not stab the knot. She did not stab herself. She did the impolite, inadvisable thing. She held it out for the cord to drink from her on purpose. A laugh came like wet velvet tearing. Good child, said the shape that is not speech. You season yourself. No, Maya thought, with the plainness of a yes turned around. I season you. The compound, Voss's long work, full of fear and faith, moved from her outspread mind into the brightness like dye into water, not dissolution, definition. The house that loved indeterminacy was being made to pick frames. It fought. It flung at her every room where she had almost fallen asleep at wrong times. The bus aisle, the after-lunch lab, the couch in a winter sunbeam, and tried to pin her between them. It pried at the rope with careful fingers and looked toward Sarah as if she might be purchased. Sarah read. Her voice came back from tin to wood to warm skin. She spoke the sentence with the pancake in it. She laughed at the point where she always laughed because it surprised her every time. The laugh landed like a hook in good timber. David's frequency rose until the gap between notes turned into a saw. The collectors flickered, faces misfiring, their stutters rendered ridiculous by the insistence of rhythm. The brightness hardened. Threads in the lattice stopped being everywhere at once and had to be somewhere in particular. They did not like it. Two popped with a sound that was not a sound, but an idea of corks. Elsewhere in other rooms, in other cities, monitors pinged, eyebrows lifted. Someone woke and swore softly at a dream they would not be able to keep. Maya reached for her mother and felt Lynn's yes come up the rope like warmth. The house screamed without sound, without air, like geometry complaining. "Time," David said from far close, voice landing like a lifeguard's float. 26. Maya let go. She took her hands off every lever with the discipline of someone stepping back from a patient's open chest. She ran. The stare agreed to be there. The watcher stood like a lamppost in hard weather. The rope burned sweet and honest, and she took it. Surface, lamp, keys, honey, and lemon. Sarah's cry turning into a laugh, and then into tears. David's hand hovering over a button he did not press. Boss's eyes filled but not spilling. "How long?" Maya asked, because the universe needed translating into numbers for a second. 29:47, David said, voice a coin skipping then landing. "We cut it as fine as we promised not to." Maya swallowed the spoonful of honey and lemon. It tasted like the first day of being sick when you know you will get well. She set the spoon down with reverence. Across the city, sirens did not sound, but a murmur did. In a dozen hospitals, in quiet rooms with wallpaper vines and small lakes of lamplight, eyelids fluttered, hands twitched, the shape of a breath changed. A nurse looked up and said a name that would finally have a place to land. Maya's phone vibrated with a message from a number that had only ever called read. It contained no words, only an ellipsis then. "You moved a thing. Buckle everything." She laughed soft and wrecked. "We moved a thing." Sarah touched a cheek where a tear had cut a clean line. "You came back," she said, as if that were the only measure that mattered. Maya looked at the nightstand. The keys were still. The photograph winked a flash of lamp. In the metal rim, her reflection lifted its head with her. Chapter 14. When the house turns its head. The day walked around with its shoelaces tied together. Elevators stalled between floors only for a breath. People blinked and forgot the end of a sentence, and then remembered it with a laugh that didn't know why it was laughing. A barista spilled milk and made a small C on the counter, then stood staring at the foam as if listening. The world was fine, except for the feeling of a table leg shifting on a coin. Maya sat with Sarah and her mother in the care facility. Afternoon sun turning the chrysanthemums into small lanterns. Lynn's eyes moved more now. They tracked windows and hands and the crinkle at the corners of Sarah's smile. She didn't wake yet, but she waited differently. Waiting can be an action. They were learning its verbs. Reed texted again. Not just here. Signals in 6 states. Old patients stirring. Not had neighbors. David, who had stopped pretending this wasn't the most important research of his life, rolled a chair to the window and stared at the sky like it might show EEG squiggles if he asked nicely. If you pulled 2 fibers, he said, the lattice had to route around it. It's choosing pathways on the fly. The definition's making it leak power. I wish I didn't sound excited. You sound like someone who's allowed to be, Sarah said, laying a hand on his shoulder. You also sound like you haven't eaten a vegetable in 2 days. Voss stood near the bed and attended. Her attention had weight. For a long time, she'd been the person in the room who knew what had to be done and could not do it without breaking things. She hadn't forgiven herself. She had not expected others would. "Tonight?" she asked quietly. "Not deep," Maya said. "Brief, polite. I want to check on the farm, and then—" She swallowed. "I think the house saw me see it. We should talk to it on purpose." Voss's jaw worked around a thought she didn't want to prepare. There's talking and there's stepping into a throat. They went home, ate the kind of soup that makes the body remember it has a center, and put the apartment back into its gentle theater, lamp, keys, photo, honey, frequency, list. When the seam arrived, the watcher stood already present as if it had never left its appointment. The farm's geometry was disheveled. A collector tilted faces toward the damage like a beekeeper coming upon a hive that had been bumped. The brightness pulsed with the irritation of a machine forced into manual mode. Awarenesses trembled within the web's loosening. Some held, some slid toward the rope Maya had left in place the last time simply by loving someone on the other side. Her mother's attention touched hers, warm metal, steady hands. "Quick, not brave," Lynn had said, but there was another kind of courage that came from doing the quiet work and then refusing applause. Maya surfaced, took stock, set down the habit of sprinting. Later at the table, Reed's files spread like a deck. Voss cleared her throat. "I should tell you something ugly," she said, voice thin as wire. "You must know the house has made bargains with people before. With me, after Catherine. It offered comfort, which is not the same as mercy. I brought it mines it asked for, thinking there would be a tithe for my child. There was, for a while. That's what house rules do. They keep their end until they don't." Silence sat down and made itself comfortable. "You used your compound on them," David said. Not angry exactly. Scientists sometimes forget the shape of that. More like sad. "I believed it softened things," Voss said. "Made the edges less jagged. We are very good at beliefs that protect us from the word harm." "Is your compound a key?" Maya asked. "Or a spotlight?" Voss looked at her as if at an answer she didn't get to earn. "Both," she whispered. "It renders the undefined into a shape, and shapes can be pushed. I told myself it was for cages. Perhaps it was for bait." She folded her hands as if she were in a pew. "I am sorry in the way that doesn't change the bill." Sarah reached across and, after a long moment, touched Voss's knuckles. "Then you help us pay." Voss nodded, a relief like winter finally admitting it has snowed enough. That night, the seam opened like a book that had been waiting for the hand that knew where its weight was. The watcher lifted into a tension that had sorrow at its seams. Maya did not descend at once. She stood in the doorway of the gap and let the house feel her looking. "I know you," she thought evenly. "I know the rooms you hide in. Come talk where I can hear you." The air took its breath away. It arrived without footstep or shadow, merely by being. A field, a taste of coin, the smell of old weather. If attention can smile, it did with a mouth full of patience. It tried on her father's voice for a moment and saw it didn't fit. It tried her first teachers. It tried nothing. Space around the bed decided not to be space for a second. "You came," said the thought that isn't speech. "You will leave less." Maya kept her breath low in her ribs. "We take what we brought," she said back in the house's language, specific, present tense, polite. "Our people, our minutes. You will leave more." The brightness flexed, the lattice creaked, the collector stuttered as if the projector had stuck a frame. The watcher did not move. It cast a shade and let her stand in it. "There are other rooms," the house murmured, "between breath and breath, between steps, between the last thought and the dark. You touched one knot in one wall. Do you think this is all?" "I think my mother is not your battery," Maya said, and felt the rope in her palm as an object with grain. "And a woman you took from Elise, and the 19 who worked for Reed and never got to retire. I think the world is worse for your appetite, even if your appetite is old." "Old," agreed the thing, and the agreement was like a winter tree creaking, old and necessary. "No," Maya thought, "old and fed. You learned a table manner. We're changing the restaurant." That was when the brightness tilted its head in genuine interest, not hunger or surprise. Curiosity is the hinge upon which even old doors swing. "You mistake the house for a resident," it said, "but you are shaped by this too. Remove the between, and what will you become? You, personally, woman with ropes. Are you prepared to sleep like stone and wake like stone? Will you count yourself lucky when you cannot dream any more?" Maya felt the words land where they were meant to land. Sometimes a threat courts you by naming a truth too early. She tasted lemon and understood cost. She did not answer. The house does not need your answer to make its argument. It prefers you to hear it. It withdrew by a hair, which in that space is a measure of miles. The watcher breathed, which is to say, it changed the depth by a sigh and made the floor remember itself. It sent her the smallest feeling, the weight of a hand on a rope, not letting go. "Tomorrow," Maya said into the room, "we go where your wall is thickest." Say continue for the next chapter. Chapter 15, down to where the pause was born. Morning pretended not to tremble. They ate toast because toast is what you eat on mornings when you need bread to remember what it's for. Reed sent coordinates that were not coordinates so much as sent trails, ports, wards, stations, places where waiting had built a shrine of habit. Voss polished the keys with a cloth like a ritual. David slept in the afternoon with a hoodie over his face, and the alarm set to wake him in 90 minutes. He didn't quite make it, and woke to his own laugh at nothing. At dusk, Maya stood at Lynn's bedside and said, "Later," in both languages. Sarah kissed Lynn's temple and left a sprig of mint on the windowsill. They moved through their apartment, making the same useless and necessary manipulations of space, stacking books that had already accepted their stacks, wiping counters that were clean, until the room understood it was being asked to hold. They added a new anchor, a loop of ribbon knotted 3 times, 1 knot for each of the names the lattice had taken from them. Lynn, Catherine, the 19. Maya tucked it in her fist. The seam arrived carrying a stillness that felt like a stage waiting for a curtain. The watcher stepped into its appointment and fogged the edges of the room so the house would declare itself to be shapes. Maya nodded back once, the way you acknowledge a doorman, a teacher, a tree. Depth 1, hum. Depth 2, rust. Depth 3, angles misbehaving with greater confidence as if knowing they had been noticed. Depth 4, the room with too many floors, now busy as a port before storm. She took the stare that only existed if she looked sideways. The brightness at center held steady like held breath. The collectors kept their rounds because when you have done a job long enough, you do it even when the world rips, until someone tells you to put the tool down. The rope to Sarah burned and soothed. David's frequency made the air dimple, as if heavy rain were trying to happen on the wrong side of a window. Voss's chime sat like a word in her lungs. She went for the thickest wall the map suggested, the knot that smelled of formaldehyde and tallow candles, of train oil and the starch of old sheets. She didn't touch it. She made it decide to be touched by watching with all the specificity she owned. She sang, quiet, persistent, the tune Lynn had hummed when the rice boiled. It poked memory in the lattice where memory liked to ooze through. The knot slid the way a book sometimes slides on a shelf because you were thinking of it. The brightness stiffened, then flickered. Definition forced itself like bones on something that wanted to be fog. The house laughed, but this time the laugh had edges. Good, it said, with something like admiration. Then let us define you in trade. The rope went violin thin. Sarah's voice, once warm wood, thinned to wire. The watcher's shade shivered like a tree-learning wind. Maya felt her edges begin to draw off as if paint were being peeled a careful way. She lifted the syringe and thought. This time, the brightness reached for it first, greedy, willing to eat anything to reclaim its favorite vagueness. She let it drink. She pushed more. She turned her mind into woven reeds and forced definition on it too. Ribs, scars, the freckle near the jaw, the gum line on the left, the soft spot by the knee, the precise sound of Sarah's shoes on her hallway floor, the exact pattern of cracks in the plaster above a kitchen door. More threads popped. Elsewhere, a man woke and wept into his daughter's shirt. A woman in another country flailed and then said her own name, surprised at its spelling. A nurse whispered, "Oh, honey," and held a hand that was suddenly holding back. The house shuddered. It is hard to be made a noun when you prefer to be a verb. Enough, it said, and for the first time it sounded tired. We will take our tithe and call it even. That was when the surprise came from the right place, not from the house, but from the shadow that watched Maya all her life. The watcher stepped forward the inch that was a mile, placed itself in front of the pull, and offered its being. Take me, it told the house. Or if it didn't say, it performed. It pressed itself into the web at an angle that made the threads sing. A sentinel kneeling, a lighthouse dimming, an umbrella turning inside out. No, Maya shaped, with a panic that lived in the throat of her thoughts. Not you. The watcher's attention washed her shoulders with a feeling she had known before, without knowing she knew it. The way you feel when a hand pauses on your back at a curb, the way you feel when a teacher lets you correct yourself without humiliation. Not kindness, not sacrifices, theatrics, simply the application of a physics. Weight here, lift there, door held. It gave itself to the knot, to the web, to the bright place where hunger had learned to be civil. It offered an edge the house could not resist defining. The house grabbed. It pulled the watcher in the way tides take what leans too far. The tallness dissolved with the slow dignity of sugar. In return for something it had not calculated, the house let go of what it had hoarded. The web slackened, lattices softened, the brightness stumbled. If functions can stumble, it did. Collectors flickered, their stutter suddenly a stammer. Now, said something in Maya, maybe Reed's dry voice, maybe Voss's stubbornness, maybe Sarah's steady naming. She grabbed the rope, the ribbon knotted thrice. The smell of mint on a windowsill, the sound of keys tapped once like a chime of permission. She tugged, up and up, the stair that sometimes was, past the port of angles, past the rust smell, past the hum. She broke the surface of the room with a sound like learning to breathe again after a winter cold. The lamp shone. Sarah's face was wet and laughing and furious. David's hand trembled hard enough to make the button on the tense unit rattle. Voss sat as if someone had taken 50 pounds from her shoulders and placed the same 50 in her lap. "How long?" Maya asked, because numbers make the air solid. 2947, David said, a prayer disguised as a report. Phones began to buzz. Not one, all. Read again. Brace. Hospitals. News. The words came in their small glass squares as if bottled lightning had been placed in their palms. She's awake. He's speaking. They're sitting up. We don't know why. Maya reached for the honey and lemon and took it like sacrament. The taste hit her nose and her eyes at once. Something inside her stood, like a person who had been crouched too long. Then the room learned the cost it had promised. Sleep approached her later, with its open hands. She stepped into it and found nothing on the other side. No soft corridor, no hum, no rust, no watcher in the corner with patient height. She turned her head this way and that and discovered that the seam was gone. The house had boarded up this door for her. She slept like stone. She woke like stone. It was clean and vast and left no footprints. She lay in the dark and missed the small sounds of between the way you miss a city that has its own weather. She loved being alive with a love that made her throat hurt. She also grieved in a precise, domestic way. Somewhere, very far and very close, a tallness did not stand any more. A lighthouse had been spent. There would be other lighthouses, worse or better, in other rooms. Morning came, ordinary and therefore holy. They dressed in clothes that smelled like laundry. They went to Lynn's room with their hearts braced. Lynn woke the way you wake from a nap taken in accidental sunlight, baffled, then amused, then thirsty. Her first word was Maya's name, but shaped like laughter instead of panic. She drank water and made a face, and then made another, because the second face was a choice. Catherine woke across town, in a room with a view of a parking lot and a sliver of sky. She said, "Keys," and Voss's knees failed her in the hallway, and she sat, and then she stood, and then she walked in with all the gentleness she could carry. Reed stared at a television with the sound off and cried into a paper napkin like a man who had never been given a better ritual. Maya stood there in the too warm room and understood that victory is a strange word for this. She sat and let her mother touch her hair. Sarah kissed Lynn's cheek and excused herself to cry in a bathroom where the soap smelled like hotel and a paper towel could do its inadequate work. That night, in bed, they turned off the lamp. The keys did not ring. The corner remained a corner with the humility of furniture. Maya turned her face into the pillow and felt grateful and hollow in the same breath. Say continue for the next chapter. Chapter 16, Rooms After. rooms before. The world arranged explanations. It always does. An atmospheric event, a cascade in a drug supply, a power failure that reset machines in the same way in many places. Doctors said miracle because they had to bill someone, and hope doesn't have a CPT code. Families made soup because soup is the coin you pay the newly returned with. Journalists called Reed until he switched phones. David wrote an abstract and then erased it and wrote another that didn't put teeth where none belonged. Maya met mornings like benches meet people, ready to hold, surprised by who sat. She didn't dream. The void was not cruel. It simply was. She wrote in her notebook more tenderly than before. Dates, weather, the taste of cinnamon, the way the plant on the dresser had decided to put out one brave new leaf. She wrote the names of each person she learned had woken, as if spelling them would help. Voss surrendered herself to rooms without keys, handcuffs first, then offices with plastic chairs. There were questions with bad music in their bones. She did not argue with the shape of blame. She arranged it neatly on the table and pushed it toward the center. Yes, she said, which was not the same as, please hurt me. Yes. Before they led her away, she stood outside the care facility and looked up at a window where a young woman stared back at the day, as if refusing permission to blink. Voss tipped her chin in apology and in pride. The two look alike from certain angles. On a Thursday, with a wet smell of recent rain, Maya stood in front of an auditorium full of sympathetic skeptics and read a paper with careful nouns. She did not say house. She did not say watcher. She said transitional awareness and adversarial attractor and non-REM admixture and community outcomes. People asked respectful questions. One man suggested software artifacts. She took a breath, smiled as if they were at a party and said, yes, that's possible, and then said the more difficult thing, and also, people woke up. After, a small line of strange, brave faces waited by the stage. They were the kind of people who would leave bowls of milk out for luck if the bowls didn't break their rent. A woman said she saw the ceiling tilt at the grocery store whenever she paused with her cart. A teenager said he could feel when his brother slipped into sleep from across town like a tug on a string. An elderly man asked if there were still collectors. Maya did not tell them there were more rooms because honesty should never be a door you push someone through without warning. She took names and made a list for a support group. They would meet once a month, bring tea, and refuse to let each other be alone with the coin smell. In the apartment, life built itself. Sarah returned to her classroom and taught small people the difference between there and there and there. She said, with the steady smile of a weathered captain, that sometimes you use all three in one sentence, and the sentence lives anyway. She and Maya argued about the laundry schedule and the best way to load the dishwasher, and whether you should fold fitted sheets with effort or give up. Fighting and making up is its own anchor. They tied it in a bow. Lynn came to dinner on Sundays in a jacket she said made her feel like a chair that won't wobble. She held the spoon with a little shake, but she held it. Sometimes she paused and looked at a corner like she expected the tallness, then smiled and corrected herself. She planted herbs on her balcony and texted pictures of mint at sunset with the gravity of sacred rites. At night, when sleep came without path, Maya lay and counted the small things. she did not seek the seam. She had been spared it. She held the absence gently, the way you hold a letter from someone who has died and know the letter is not them. She missed the watcher in the way you miss an early morning bus route they discontinued, quietly, fiercely, while knowing you don't actually want to stand out on that corner anymore with cold hands. 3 months later, on a Tuesday that had gone on too long in a way ordinary Tuesdays do, she stood in the bathroom and brushed her teeth. The mirror held its patient rectangle. Her face did its face things. She had a spot that might be a pimple at the line of her hair, which was the sort of thing you can love without making it a poem. She blinked. Between the two blinks, no time. All time. Her reflection did not move with her. It lagged by something less than a heartbeat, more than a blink. It smiled. Not cruelly, not kindly. Like someone who has recognized you across a room and wants you to acknowledge you saw them too. Then it matched her, timing its spit and rinse, its towel pat, its breath. Maya laughed quietly. She felt her ribs lift, drop. She looked at her mouth in the mirror and let it be a mouth. She turned off the light, went to bed, found Sarah's ankle with her toes, and anchored herself on that small bone, the one you can name, in the dark. Later, while the city slept with fewer debts, the gap between blinks kept its own counsel. The house had closed a door and found another. There are always seams between living and dying, between being held and being let go, between a question and answer that comes late, like a train that still crests the hill glowing. When sleep took her, it took her like a coin dropping into a jar. No corridor, no hum, but the jar was theirs. Epilogue. Soft weather. The news cycle moved on. It always does. People married. People fell out of love. People fixed roofs and broke shoelaces and warmed leftovers at midnight while considering sending a text they should not send. The recovered learned to live with 8 years of gap, or 15 or 3 months that felt like a cliff in a meadow. Therapy rooms learned new adjectives. Nurses told each other new stories, the kind they swore they weren't supposed to tell and told anyway, with hands hugging cups and words thrown like blankets over thin shoulders. Maya carried a small spool of ribbon in her bag. Knots help. She taught a quiet class at the library every other Wednesday. They talked about breathing and corners. They laughed more than the librarians preferred, then brought cookies in apology. Once, a man from the class brought a wind chime he'd made from hardware store keys and old spoons. They hung it in the courtyard, and the sound it made embarrassed the pigeons into propriety. David published careful work and had his appendix out and learned to enjoy being briefly useless. He started sleeping on the right side because he'd learned the left made him dream he was stuck on escalators. He finally bought a plant and proudly kept it alive with texts to Sarah that said things like, "He's still green." Voss sat in rooms where the furniture was determined to be sturdy. She answered questions without making herself the center. Her daughter visited, bringing keys and soup and the smell of homemade bread that make guards shift their weight. When at last the rooms let Voss go, they gave her back to the weather. She stood under a tree and did nothing for a long time, which is sometimes the only penance worth making. She did not return to the cabin with the diagrams. She rented a smaller place and hung 1 page of notes by the door, a spiral drawn lightly in a sentence. Do not look at the seam as if it owes you anything. Reed retired again, for real this time, and took up walking to a pier at sunrise because he liked the way fishermen argued without malice. He kept an old flip phone in a drawer that never rang again, and one night he held it, remembered it chiming, said, "Not today," and fell asleep in the chair like an uncle at Thanksgiving. Sarah taught. The children grew. Some of them would someday keep bowls of milk by chance. Some of them would never know they were spared a house. All of them learned where commas go well enough. Lynn folded paper cranes without counting. She kept a jar on her sill for them to inhabit. She went to a concert in the park and cried at a cello without bothering to be embarrassed about crying. She planted rosemary and said to a neighbor, "Here, take some," which is the line that starts communities. At home, the keys tapped in winter when the heat came on. The plant became two plants. The photograph lived by the bed like a friendly lighthouse. The honey crystallized and was warmed and melted and spooned out again when someone in that room had a sore throat, which is another word for love. Sometimes, brushing her teeth, Maya lingered a heartbeat and did not blink. The reflection, polite, matched her without games. Once, on a morning when the fog rolled in off the river, the mirror flickered a little and she flickered back, and both of them agreed not to tell. She slept like stone and woke like stone and dreamed during the day with everything she had. With conversation and coffee smell, with the huff of the bus and the drum of rain, with the exact sound Sarah made when she laughed into her shoulder, with the small ring of the wind chime when the window was cracked and the world was mild. If the house of between had other rooms, and it did, because houses do, it learned this about them: they would not walk in alone any more. And if a tallness ever came to stand in the corner of a room where two people were asleep, it stood only to check the windows were latched and the lamp was safe and the key rattle would be heard. It stood to keep count. It stood until dawn, which is a shift like any other. The city turned over warm under its blankets. Somewhere a fox song lived in a child's mouth. Somewhere a nurse tucked a sheet with the professional love that is one of our last honest crafts. Somewhere the pause between thoughts smiled and learned something it had not expected. That definition can be a form of grace. That ropes tied with names can be stronger than absence. That a seam, asked politely, sometimes answers with weather that favors those who wait together.